Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for connecting. This is Patrick Brown, and just excited about being online today. I just want to welcome everyone and give you some time to connect and share. So as soon as you come in and you see us live, please go ahead and share. Really excited about our conversation today. We've been having incredible dialogue regarding GPS lately, and that's been just transformative for so many people. And so today we're going to continue down that conversation, down that path. But today's conversation is a conversation of understanding, a conversation of understanding. So I want to go ahead and as you're coming in, give you some time to just share this and looking forward to it. Come on in and please tag your friends, please connect with others. Let us know that you're here. We look forward to connecting with all of you that are coming online today. So go ahead and connect with us. Please share, please tag your friends, bring others in. So good to see each of you. Hope that you're having a very good afternoon. So as soon as you get this, you can start a watch party on your page, if you will. Also share this with others so that others can begin to connect with us today. So looking forward to it. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank everyone for connecting. As you're coming on board, please make sure that you share this on your page or start a watch party, perhaps even share it in your inboxes or your messenger so that others can come on board and they can join in this conversation. Again, my name is Patrick Brown and I'm the moderator from our Renewal Center here in Charlotte, Concord, North Carolina. And I have with me today a wonderful man of God who is very important to my life for the past probably 12 years or so, Bishop Joey Johnson, who is the senior pastor of the House of the Lord and the presiding prelate of the Beth-El Fellowship of Visionary Churches in Akron, Ohio. So Bishop, just want to thank you for being here with us today.
Brother Patrick, you don't know how excited I am. This is going to be a great conversation.
I am so excited. This is great because, first of all, it's my birthday. So I get to have you in a conversation.
Don't forget, happy birthday. Happy birthday.
Thank you. Thank you. And to have a conversation around grief and even to post-traumatic stress disorder, this is the month that's been delegated as the post-traumatic stress disorder month. So becoming aware of the stress, becoming aware of any disorders, our mental health, our emotional health is critical. And I began to reflect this morning many years ago when I was dealing with my own dysfunction as a husband. I was going through in my marriage. I was going through divorce. My mom was passing during that time, and how you helped me through that whole grief process of looking at, what was in my life in terms of my home of origin, what was inside of my life in my boyhood and my childhood, navigating through young adulthood into mature adulthood where I am now, and how certain aspects in my emotional and my mental life has impacted how I was functioning in my home. And through those conversations we had on those Monday evenings where we would talk and in times that we would really share, one of the things that I learned was looking at my root and looking at my home of origin, but also knowing how to process those emotions and understand not only what I'm feeling, but why I'm feeling that way. And the more that I began to understand why I was feeling that way and trace down to the roots, I began to see healing emerge in my life. And so through that, I remember at that time I had just written Change Matters. It was 2014, 2015 or so, and you wrote the foreword to that. And that was really when this journey of uncovering some content in my own life came from. And so I think this is a great conversation that you and I are able to conduct today to let others in on helping them understand that it's okay to have this conversation. And so we're ministering and talking today from a position of compassion, from a place of empathy, sympathy, from a place of loving people, caring for them, being concerned about the state of affairs in our world today. Also want to say, just want to read something briefly to the audience concerning where we are in our world today. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, just over 19% of all American adults will experience at least one anxiety disorder. So over any 12-month period. So the name suggests, there's also something called generalized anxiety disorder, GAD, which involves pathological responses to just everyday challenges. It could be worrying over money, worrying even over how you may look in your image, to deadlines at work, to demands in our homes, or even in parenting. And in addition to worrying about contracting COVID-19 because of our pandemic, because of misinformation, disinformation, information overload, mourning over deaths and illnesses from the novel coronavirus, thousands of people are concerned about how they will be able to recover financially, how they're going to overcome emotionally, psychologically from the losses, even not being able to attend funerals and having to attend funerals virtually from a loved one when we want to physically be there. But then there was the risk, and there's double grief, there's added grief and loss. And according to the recent Kaiser Family Foundation poll, nearly 45%, or half of adults in the United States, reported that their mental health has been negatively impacted due to worry and stress over the virus. So that's just pandemic. That's not even adding the recent bombardment of video images regarding the death of a Black man at the hands of two other gentlemen who killed him, and then two other white men there in Georgia, and then the police officer that killed George Floyd, and the other police officers that were present. So then you have the videos, you have the grief, you have the collective grief, you have the collective anger. So no matter what the specific reason is, our mental health is being impacted one way or another. We're in a state of crisis. It was like that before, now it's amplified. And so it's better for us to be mindful of these issues now and be prepared to fight them and navigate them now than to be caught unaware and face harder consequences as a result. And so that is why we're here today, folks. And so, Bishop, I just want us to talk, let's share. We can free flow. We know that the areas we're going to cover today, but let's just start out with stress, grief, and we can project from there.
Well, Patrick, thank you. Apostle, Dr. Elder Patrick. There's a thing I want to say, first of all, that you are, the things that you shared are very important. Your transparency is incredible. But I also want to affirm you that you did the work. I mean, we can sit down, I can tell you some truth, and we can do that. But a lot of people aren't willing to do the work that it's going to take to be able to get where you need to go. So I want to affirm you, sir, that you did the work. And then as we look at these characteristics, I mean, I have never seen, I was just talking to a pastor just before we got on not too long ago. I have never seen anything like what we are seeing right now. This is unprecedented. Not only the stress, but the grief, and that grief is cumulative. That it adds up. So when you add all those things you just read that just have to do with grief, and then the stress around that, I mean, these are incredible times. And yet in America, we've kind of separated the body from the soul. We want to talk about the soul, but we don't want to talk of the body. We don't do a lot of talk about the soul. We want to talk, do you have your check? We'll make sure you get your job squared out. We'll make sure you got some food. And those are all important. But the soul is just as important. And we might say from a spiritual perspective, more important, it's going to last forever. And yet we're not talking about the soul. So I relish this opportunity to be able to share some information. This is going to be more informational so that people can begin to grasp what it is they're going through. And then maybe we can come back and we're going to suggest some solutions, but we won't be able to get deep. But the solutions might surprise you anyway. So Brother Patrick, let's talk a little bit by starting with grief. Okay. Because you can't, all of these things are convoluted and they have so many definitions, but if we don't define them accurately, we're going to be in trouble. And I think a lot of collisions here. So grief, the way we define it from the Grief Recovery Institute, is the conflicting feelings that's caused by the end or the change in any familiar pattern of behavior. So that could be the loss of a loved one, which most people are familiar. That's the only thing they think about is the loss. But anytime a pattern of behavior changes, there's going to be some kind of conflicting feelings. I mean, even if you get a bank loan, there's a conflicting feeling. You want the money, but you don't want the payment. So you've got conflicting feelings. And the symptomology of that is hoping for a better yesterday. Okay. Wishing things had been different better, or more. You got shock, you have disbelief, you could have numbness, sadness, tears, depression, sorrow, loneliness, isolation, bargaining, searching, panic, anxiety, frustration, sleeplessness, fear, anger, guilt, powerlessness. All of these characteristics, uh, after a while, it becomes, we're not sure what we're dealing with because we have all of this confluence of feeling and characteristic. But grief is a very powerful feeling. It's a very powerful, also the grief recovery method. It's a mechanism, that a method you can use to overcome. But first, we got to become aware.
Okay.
You can't, if you're not aware, you're not going to be able to deal with this. And I want to ask you a question while we do this back and forth. What kicked off your awareness? How did you become aware of that?
I became aware mainly because, first of all, I physically was getting ill in some areas of my personal life. I didn't understand why I was going through certain patterns in my life. Some people, spirits, you can call them strongholds. I can call it an error in thinking, whatever it might be. But the error in my thought processes weren't really healthy. And what kicked it off was certain attitudes that I had, irritability that was there. Some of my decision making processes were impacted. I wasn't thinking clearly in terms of my own function and responsibility, even accountability. There was hiding. So when I began to hide specific areas, so that's and what I mean by hiding is don't want anybody to know I'm supposed to be this man of God. I shouldn't have these issues. I shouldn't have this feeling. So that's when I began to see, when saw that fruit show up, that's when I really began to say, there's something you need to deal with and address.
Patrick, you don't know how important it is what we're doing today for you to be able to share personally, so that we're not dealing ethereally with theory. If there's anything that begins to frighten me about the church, it's the fact that we want to do things and talk them in theory, but not talk in reality. And It's reality and the reality of what we're dealing with that people can really begin to hone in, relate, and begin to get some help. So I want to move from grief to stress, because we're talking about post-traumatic stress disorder. And you think that people probably know what that is, but it's really a pretty complex syndrome. We probably need to start with stress and move our way up so that people can get a grasp of it. So let's go to stress. Stress is the non-specific response of the body to any demand. The symptomology is generally regarded as a response to negative experiences. Stress can result from desired, and it also can come from positive experiences, such as marriage or moving or a job change or leaving home for college. So stress is your non-specific response to that. And by the way, there's positive stress, because there wasn't no stress, Brother Patrick, we wouldn't get up and go to work in the morning.
I know that's right.
Stress says, if I don't get up, I'm not going to eat. And so stress can be positive, but your response to stress can start a lot of movement in your parasympathetic nervous system, can cause you to respond without knowing you respond. And the three responses that when you start to really have those kinds of issues are fight, flight, and one that most people don't mention because it's not in the earlier material, but or freeze. It's fight, flight, or freeze can indicate that you are under some stress. Something's going on very seriously at that particular point. So grief is about conflicting feelings when changes occur. Stress is about your response to any demand that might be happening in your sphere of influence. Now, let's talk about this for a minute, Dr. Patrick. How many demands do we have on us right now?
Oh, gosh. Personal, collectively, nationally, socially, politically.
Yep. So there's so many, it's almost hard to mention them. I was thinking, and I was talking to another person earlier today in an appointment, and they were saying, well, what are we trying to do? Well, we got job demands.
Right.
We got unemployment demands. I was talking to somebody who lost their job and they weren't sure whether they were going to get unemployment. And we've got everyday demands. We've got pandemic demands. How are we going to stay safe? How are we going to do? Let me just talk about me. I got church demands.
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to open back up? How are we going to open back up? What is that going to mean? Then you have personal demands, my own demands with my own wife in my own house, and those things that are going. And you could just go down, and we live in such a dynamic time that those demands are powerful.
And then we have those self-imposed expectations. We have the self-imposed limitations. We have the self-imposed unknowns that
Yep.
we perceive that may not even really be a demand, but we create it as a demand because of the narrative that's going on inside.
Absolutely. That's a great point, because sometimes people are thinking about demand in terms of something that somebody else has done, or something that is tangible. The demand may be self-imposed.
Right.
The demand may be, you may be doing that to yourself, but it still is a powerful demand. And so we're going to move our way little by little up to post-traumatic stress so we can see if we can understand it. So the next thing on the agenda and on the chart is traumatic stress. Traumatic stress is the stress that results from a traumatic incident, a psychological or emotional stress or blow that may produce disordered feelings or behavior. The symptomology is a little bit different, because now with acute stress disorder, within 1 month after a particular experience, it can be an event that involves a threat or an actual death or a serious injury or another kind of physical violation, that you begin to respond with strong feelings of fear and helplessness and horror. Now, let me just take a moment right now and say, if you're listening to this, I want you to be able to breathe deeply right now, because as we begin to talk about stress, talking about stress can produce stress. And I want you to be safe. We don't want to do anything that would harm you. You need the information, but you need to take that information in at your pace, in your own time, in your own way. Brother Patrick, can you talk a little bit about having that kind of stress in your life? Did you have any panic attacks or anything of that nature?
Yeah, I did. I remember when my mother was going through her challenges with Alzheimer's, and that was at the same time that I was going through the divorce process. So it was compounded guilt from just not having a healthy marriage. That was one thing that impacted it, because it was traumatic, because I'm concerned about how my mother's feeling, how it's impacting me, my brothers and sisters, my father. Then what I was experiencing in my own life, how that impacting the call that's on my life, my responsibilities as a spouse, as a father. There were so many different aspects. So I remember I even started breaking out with hives at one point. Honestly, my body started responding. I was working out, but then I wasn't working out.
Okay.
So much so that I ended up in the hospital.
Oh, wow.
So, and just like the hiding, the stress, the trauma, it was such a disorder at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And through that disorder, it brought even more physical symptoms. Once I was able to unpack that and own that and own the entire process from beginning to end, for me, that's when I began to see myself navigate out of it. But those were some of the physical and physiological issues that I dealt with at that time. So I could definitely identify it was a result of traumatic incidents, but it was a series of them, and it felt compounded as well. And having to admit and to own, it just added even more, because now it's like, God, I got to take accountability. There's responsibility for certain things, and then when you spiritualize it, then it made it even worse at times. So again, those are just a few of my thoughts towards what I had experienced.
Brother Patrick, that's going to help people, because as you begin to understand what you're feeling. And what you said kind of triggered something else. Let me just say for a moment that sometimes when I was going on vacation one time and I had an anxiety attack, the first time I ever had one, and I was trying to figure out what in the world is going on. If you've never had one, I don't want you to have one.
Right.
But you need to recognize that some people may have anxiety attacks and it feels like that you are losing it. You're not going to make it. And you need protocols. You need to be able to calm yourself down and breathe deeply and those kinds of things, which Eastern religion is very big on. Western religion isn't. We think we're going to think our way out of everything, but sometimes you have to calm your body, calm your soul.
Okay.
And now we're talking about Bible stuff here, rest, I say, in the Lord. I'm sorry to talk about bringing the Bible up in here, but that's what we believe in. So, I mean, thanks for sharing that. I mean, that's powerful. So if you're looking at the chart, kind of on the right coming down, and Brother Patrick's done an excellent job with that chart. Then you're moving from stress to traumatic stress.
Okay.
And then we're going to move on over to post-traumatic stress. So hopefully by walking you through this, you can kind of see what's going on. Post-traumatic stress is traumatic stress that persists following post a traumatic incident. Though there are no statistics, no one can guess that there are you can guess that there are a significant number of trauma survivors from post-traumatic stress or PTS, and those who fall between the cracks and not recovered from their traumas. You've had a trauma and you're really not recovered from it. You are without, you haven't gotten to the rehabilitation. It really has not stopped you from functioning, but something definitely is not right. And these individuals, if you recognize yourself in some of this, recognition, awareness is the first step towards healing. And you can benefit from some trauma therapy because we want to get you healthy. Now, the church, for the longest time, has not been willing to deal with emotional health and with spiritual health. But praise God, we're starting to get better now. We're starting to understand that if God is a part of our lives, He wants us not only to be physically well, but intellectually, emotionally, spiritually healthy. And so the impact might not necessarily be, because some people would think, well, then my whole life is wrecked. No, it could just be in one area of your life, but you definitely know that you are not right. You are not ready to go forward. Something has happened and it's had a definite impact upon you. And so that will lead us then to what we really want to talk about and to what is becoming a topic that many people are just starting to talk about. We're just starting to talk about the post-traumatic stress symptoms and disorder that goes along with the pandemic. Everybody is not doing good with the stay-at-home order. Now, some of us are loners, and we are sick, and so we good by ourselves for a while. But some folks are not doing well. So let me ask Brother Patrick, how are you with the stay-at-home?
Yeah, well, I got enough around here to do. I had moved into a condo. So when I was moving through that time, I closed on my house in the middle of quarantine. It was odd because I had to actually do it virtually and wear gloves and a mask and all that other stuff when we went into the recorder's office. That was interesting. But it's challenging because I don't have physical contact at all. Didn't have any interactions at all for an extended amount of time. Don't have a problem working from home. That's what I do in my profession. But I think the reality is that because we all have senses. I mean, I still want to taste, so I eat, right? That's great. I still hear, thankful for that. I still see, that's fine. I still smell, that's great. But the sense of touch is malnourished. In other words, the sense of touch is not connecting. So because not being able to express that, it could be just a handshake, it could be a pound. What's up, bro? Something. So it's like not having that part of it realistically is an honest truth of, wow, this is interesting. This is a struggle because you're not interacting. So what I've done is, I've started turning into more creative ways of developing, going back and I'm starting to write more. I took out my keyboard, and got a little chance to get more into my music. I haven't played in a while. I have a sewing machine. Started looking at that again. Like, hey,
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
yeah. I was like, let me make some ties, something. But it's like, it was a difficult process from that end. But then I also began to say, this is a new beginning for me. Let me use this time to express how I feel. And I talk with my friends and I share with them, and they share with me what they're experiencing. And I think that's what's been healthy for me, even though there's been that social distancing or physical distancing.
Yeah, and I want to affirm that I've talked to some of the seniors of our church, called them, and they've been telling me, I'm not doing that well. Why? Because when you live alone, that's different than when you're living with somebody.
Right.
Now, COVID-19 has not created relationship issues, but it will reveal some. And even if you're at home with somebody and you don't want to be there, you have an issue, at least somebody's there. There's somebody to fight with. When you're by yourself, that's another whole
beating yourself up.
And we weren't made to be alone.
Right.
So thanks for sharing that. That's incredibly important. So we're moving on to post-traumatic stress disorder.
All right.
It's only when the stress accumulates to the degree that it produces symptoms outlined in the Diagnostical and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders that the term post-traumatic stress can be applied. So this is a real perspective, a symptom, a diagnosis. And so PTSD implies a high level of daily dysfunction. In recent years, clinicians and researchers have paid considerable attention to the reaction of people to overwhelming, life-threatening events. In fact, nearly a century and a half ago, observers noted that the soldiers who fought in the Civil War were emotionally disturbed for years afterwards. I find this fascinating, but they called it soldier's heart. They didn't know what to call it, so that's what they call it. And then veterans of World War I suffered a similar reaction, which they call shell shock. Then in World War II, veterans experienced what they call battle fatigue, which incapacitated them for further battle. And then Vietnam, an identifiable prolonged stress reaction, was identified as post-traumatic stress disorder. So this is not new. The way we are terming it, the way that we are talking about it, the symptomology, the diagnosis is new, but people have probably been going through this as long as we have been people. It's just that we have gotten better and better at talking about it and diagnosing it. So we've come to realize that many people who are exposed to life-threatening events suffer a syndrome with predictable symptoms and progression. And most recently, we have also realized that individuals who have been exposed to a wide range of catastrophe or catastrophic events besides combat also have that perspective. So people who have experienced serious automobile accidents, natural disasters, physical assaults, they're traumatized. Others who feel vulnerable face serious physical injury from violence, rape, child abuse. Though we don't want to stay there, but I just want you to be aware, those things, they can have an impact that stops you from doing what you need to do. And so that's difficult. I was thinking about when I was a teenager, and I want to tell the whole story, but I came out from work and I had an automobile accident, and it was traumatic. And at that particular point, my father spoke to me, and I'm sitting in the car is torn up, I'm shaking. He says, "Get in and drive." I'm looking at him like he's nuts. I don't want to drive. I'm crying. I don't want to drive. I don't want to drive. Well, I was in shock. Had I not driven that day, he probably knew that. Who knows if I'd be driving today, because the trauma of what took place was having an impact and could develop into a disorder and could have trapped me at that point. So what's the symptomology? The 1994 definition of the DSM-4 takes into account that it can develop an individual response to three kinds of events: incidents that are or perceived as threatening one's life or bodily integrity. Now, we talked about this a little bit. We said it doesn't have to be actual, it can be perceived.
Yes.
Being a witness to acts of violence to others. Now, I don't think people recognize that. They think this has all got to happen to them. If you are somewhere watching this, it can have an impact. Now, Brother Patrick, let's talk about this just a little bit, because I think this is really pertinent to where we are. We watched 8 minutes and 46 seconds of a man kneeling on another man's neck. I don't think that we have probably anybody, most of us, have ever watched anything like that in our lives. We wouldn't put it in the movies. People wouldn't go and see it. We wouldn't put too much of it. I mean, they can show some gruesome stuff on TV and in movies every now and then, but not 8 minutes and 46 seconds of it. So all of a sudden, we were exposed to a gruesome kind of thing. And I'm just going to go ahead and admit to our viewers, I didn't watch it. I couldn't watch it. It was just too traumatic for me. And if I watch that, I'm not sure what the impact of that upon me is going to be. So witnessing acts of violence can have that impact. And then number three, even hearing of violence or the unexpected or violent death of somebody you know can have that kind of impact. Brother Patrick, do you have any response to that?
I do, because I think that the challenge with that is there's every person's stress or grief or response to what they view is unique, right? So in that uniqueness, now because there's a collective consciousness, and as a Black man already dealing with a double consciousness in terms of my interactions with certain people groups because of the nature of the country that I live in, and that's a whole nother dialogue we won't jump into. There's this empathy. This man is a human being. Let me just start there. From the humanity of who he is, to visually see someone murdered and their life snuffed out of them for the whole entire world to see. Then, because of the advent of social media, because we're in the age of selfies, we're in the age of self and misinformation and overinformation, then in everybody's inbox, everybody's messenger, everybody's media feed, everybody's social media feed, you're constantly seeing these images over and over and over and over again. And your neural pathways eventually become reframed, or there's a synergy between the trauma that you're viewing and the perceived drama that maybe this can happen to me, or my father, or my brother, or my son, or, and then so as a result of all of this, and folks, I'm not going to spiritualize this and say, well, right now we just declare the word of the Lord. Let's just be real with where we feel it versus spiritualize. I got to put that on the side. We know what the word says, but there's also this struggle that you can get all this imagery in you, and the imagery that we perceive, we think in terms of visual. If I say banana, you're not thinking of an orange. If I say trauma, then currently what comes up in our brain now as it relates to the words that we're using.
Absolutely.
And so to me, I think that that's the impact that it's having. Now there's more and more things that are becoming unearthed, they're being disclosed. There are more videos, there are other videos. And so now we're down this path. It's like rolling a boulder down the emotional hill, and is constantly being revealed to us this cyclical trauma that is literally post-traumatic. And we're at that like traumatic stress and that post-traumatic stress stage. Some may or may not be at that disorder phase, but they're definitely, we're on that way there if we continue with this type of narrative.
Yeah, as you said, and you're doing a great job of explaining and sharing with that. We don't want to go down, and that's not our subject, but we got to stop for a minute, because this imagery has created a post-traumatic response in people, and they don't even know that they have the response. And Joy DeGruy wrote a book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. That because of slavery and what we've experienced and living in a society that has injustice. We are traumatized on an ongoing basis. And she makes the assumption, or at least the tie-in, that perhaps the reason African Americans have a higher blood pressure generally and specifically in terms of a percentage higher than the rest of other population is because we live in stress. We are constantly living in stress. Maybe that's elevating the blood pressure of an entire people. Well, I just want to make sure we get that so that people understand that what they have seen on TV has never been seen before.
Absolutely.
So it's done something to you. And that's the reason why I decided I can't watch it. It's too much for me.
I was looking at some research. There's a book by, I think it's Manikim is the last name, and it's called My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies. That particular text deals with the transference of generational trauma and from generation to generation in the stories that we tell, like griots. You know, this is what we've dealt with, and so it's passed on, and so there's a pathway that we're now having discussions to help mend that.
Absolutely.
That book particularly deals with that type of it because it's racialized trauma.
Well, Brother Patrick, you bringing some resources already.
Yeah.
The resources are starting to come out. But you know, as we think about this, we are seeing perhaps, let's go here a little bit. I'm going to come back and finish up, but perhaps that's the reason we're having the outpouring we're having. People watch something for 8 minutes and 46 seconds that they have never seen before like that. Now, you got to understand, some people have seen it. If you go back into our past, and we're not going to go there, and we got to talk about lynching, some people have done, but the majority of modern people have never seen anything like that, and it's had an impact. So let's talk a little bit more about what does it do. Here are the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, and Brother Patrick, you were very clear and good to point out that you may be in post-traumatic stress, you may not be in the disorder phase, but when you get in the disorder phase, you are dealing with re-experiencing the event in various sensory forms or flashbacks. You want to avoid reminders of the trauma.
Okay.
You have chronic hyperarousal in the autonomic nervous system. Now, a lot of folks don't know this, but when I preached and started to talk about slavery and some of those things, African-American people, some of us live in hyperarousal. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know, particularly as an African-American male, if I'm driving and I get caught driving while I'm Black, we don't know what's going to happen. So I'm in a state of hyperarousal. The DSM-4 recognizes that such symptoms are normal in the immediate aftermath of a traumatic event, but it's first diagnosed when the symptoms last more than a month and they're combined with a loss of function in the areas such as one's job or social relationship. It's going to be hard to pick it up, but when you can't go to work, when you're having difficulty going out the house, those kind of things, somatic disturbance is at the core. People who suffer from it are plagued with many of the same frightening body symptoms that are characteristic of your automatic nervous system hyperarousal experience for for traumatic event. So let me get those real quick. Accelerated heart rate, cold sweating, rapid breathing, and your breathing comes up in your throat, heart palpitations, hypervigilance, hyper startle response. You can be startled very easily. Let me just give another story. When I was working at Burger Chef, now some of y'all are lost, so you said Burger King. No, this was so far back when there was a Burger Chef. And my boss had just, or one of the guys he hired had just come back from Vietnam, and he was having hyper startle response. If a car backfired or if they closed the door hard, he would jump. He would almost dive on the ground. Several times I walk in and he's like, "Don't do that, man. Don't walk up behind me like that. I'll kill you." I'm saying, "Whoa, man." But This is the impact of the stress, the post-traumatic stress disorder of Vietnam and what it had done to him.
So that hyper arousal and hyper card, what was that?
That's hyper startle.
Startle. Okay. Can you connect that hyper arousal and hyper startle and connect that to where we are now, as far as, because there's a collective sense of trauma, there's the
Yep.
individual trauma, there's
Yep.
the trauma from pandemic and quarantine, there's the
Yes.
trauma of watching a video of this man being killed and being killed slowly and methodically for 8.5 minutes. People are seeing it, not only seeing that video, but the other ones that are now coming out. How does hyper arousal and that other startle, how does that all connect and intertwine, leading to like sustainable PTSD?
Well, let me say what I think one of the impacts is, and I'm very concerned about this, that as we protest and people are already hyped up, already stressed, already, that's what can lead to rioting and looting and all of that, because it's not going to take much to startle people or to cause them to move in that direction. And I have to say that the protests have been amazingly peaceful, very peaceful. Now, there are some, we got agitators, we do have a few rioters and looters, and the media wants to fixate on them, but they've been very little. That surprises me. But this is what can happen when you are all riled up and fired up, stoked up because of stress. And perhaps that's another reason why people are coming out of their houses, not to mention that they're tired of being in there, during a pandemic, and exposing themselves in this way because of the impact. There's been a tremendous impact. Wow. So, Brother Patrick, let's start dealing with some resources.
Okay.
You've already started that very excellently, but let me just start with a couple. There are many people who have been negatively impacted by trauma, post-traumatic stress, which may have degenerated into the disorder. In the wake of trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, the possibility of becoming overwhelmed, decompensating, not being able to deal, anxiety attacks, panic attack, flashback, re-traumatization. Furthermore, dealing with those who have experienced that trauma is so precarious that talking to them about it can cause re-traumatization. So let's do something for a minute before I go forward. If you're watching right now, I need you to practice some deep breathing. Deep breathing, we know, has some impact upon your automatic nervous system and your nervous system. Eastern mystics, Eastern religion, they are more into that. We're gonna think our way, and we think and get into more anxiety. But let's take some deep breaths for a moment and just and if you can practice this, taking 10 seconds in and 10 seconds out, and then visualizing a peaceful place, a calm place for you, that we want to move from the stress into a place of calm. Now, one of the most calm places for me was when we went to Hawaii. And we went to Hawaii, and down by the ocean, it was just like, So we now know you can short circuit panic attacks and anxiety attacks by deep breathing. Now, we didn't know why that was true for a long time. People they just knew that it worked. They didn't know why. But now we know that there is a sensor on top of your lung and your cage, your rib cage, that sends a note to your brain to calm down. So not only does your brain send messages to your gut, but your gut sends messages to your brain. And we need to practice deep breathing, calming down. Brother Patrick, have you had any experience with that?
Yes, I think that in growing up, my father and mother always encouraged us to have what they called quiet time. And in quiet time, some people call it devotional. As I grew and matured, I mean, I didn't probably hear much when I was growing up, you know, but as I matured, I began to take that quiet time as a time to decompress, as a time to deep breathe. Um, and then as I moved into being an athlete, a musician, a designer of art and other aspects, the more that I did that, the better, the more I relaxed. And I think part of my devotional life now
Mm-hmm.
has I implement that as part of my devotional life the past several years. Of course, I still have that devotional life, and I'm thankful because my father always encouraged us to spend time in the word, spend time meditating, but it was always quiet. Have your journal, have your
Sure.
word, and listen. But what
Sure.
I've done to take it to the next step for me was to also implement, how do I decompress? How do I deal with what I'm feeling? And that deep breathing has helped me, and it brought clarity. It brought more clarity to, because sometimes when we get into times of quiet times, we're not really quiet. We might be vocally quiet, but we're not mentally quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're absolutely right. What are we envisioning? Part of the soul is imagination and memory, the reasoning, conscious. Those are still parts of the soul. And so we have to learn how to use our creative imagination, because with every belief that we have, there's energy that supports that belief. And so when whatever we're imagining in terms of peace and wholeness, solidarity, I would encourage us to implement that. And I think that also moves us into, the liturgy of worship, even that there are
Absolutely.
times that, let all the earth be silent before him, and how important it is that, yes, there's a time to speak, but there's also a time that there is reverence in the ritual of silence, so that we can be contemplative with how we're approaching our emotional life. So just want to share
Absolutely. Well, Patrick, you done cover about all five in one thing there. You just
that.
so, but I think it's excellent. And let's go back to the functional for a minute, because
Okay.
I didn't see that you put this up. So when you put this up, and you've done
Mhm.
an excellent job with these graphics, man, it's incredible. Functional. First of all, let's move ourselves out of any situations that might be stressful. Now, you
Okay.
can't always do that because
Right.
your job might be stressful and you can't quit. But
Right.
if you can move yourself away from people, situations, things that are stressful, that can help you. We talk a little bit about in grief recovery about the people who are toxic. If they're toxic, you need to get away from that. That's going to make you sick.
Mhm.
And so
Uh-huh.
functional, that's one thing. Physical, as we're going to talk about deep breathing, we've already talked about. I'm going to do some more with psychological. You touched on spiritual, and I don't think we need to necessarily take them in order, but I think you hit something great there. Let's go back and look at my list here
Okay.
and see what else I was talking. Oh, there's an excellent book. Here's another resource. It's called The Body Remembers. And she writes about dealing with people who have post-traumatic stress disorder. And she writes, let me quote, a useful analogy is to liken the person with PTSD to a pressure cooker. The unresolved trauma creates a tremendous amount of pressure, both in the body and in the mind, and in the form of the autonomic nervous system hyperarousal. So that means it's going to do it by itself. You don't have to tell it, your body just kicks in. With a modern pressure cooker, once the pressure is built up, it becomes impossible to open it up. If you could, it would explode. So you must first slowly relieve the pressure a little at a time.
Mhm.
Then and only then can you open any pressure cooker safely. And let me just say, I am an expert with the pressure cooker because I cook stuff with the pressure cooker all the time. And
Mhm.
so the one that I have now, when you get ready to open it up, you have to release the pressure, and
Mm.
it's got to let it on. The same applies to PTS and PTSD. If you try to open the client to trauma while the pressure is extreme, you risk explosion, which in a client's case can mean decompensation, breakdown, serious illness, suicide. However, with judicious application of breaks to gradually relieve the pressure, the whole process becomes less risky. So we're not trying to get you to do all this all at once. You want to be able to move little by little, put the brakes on, let
Mhm.
the pressure off. And optimally, the pace, if you ever go to therapy, is not going to be quicker than what you can handle. Therefore, we're talking about therapy or just coping with this particular perspective is the ability to break,
Mm.
to slow down,
Okay.
so that you might stop that autonomic arousal of your or your autonomic nervous system hyperarousal. Consequently, we're talking about resources, we're talking about stopping, we're talking about, let me go one more place that I think is incredibly important, and then we'll kind of come to the end of the hour and we'll close it up. Uh, this is simple, but it's so powerful. A
Yeah.
therapeutic relationship.
Mm.
Some people who deal with trauma reenact their trauma in other relationships, and you mentioned this in transference. Sometimes psychological symptoms, mistrust, sometimes somatic bodily symptoms. But if you have somebody in your life that is a therapeutic, they are good for you, they're healthy for you. I've been doing some reading, and one author talks about the fact that when you are in healthy relationships, you're getting healthier. When you're in unhealthy relationship, you're getting unhealthier. That relationship can be a significant part of your healing. So what you said today, Brother Patrick, was so powerful that I helped you, and we did some counseling, we did some grief recovery, we did all kinds of stuff. But maybe it's the relationship, the caring relationship
Yeah.
that helps. And
Hmm.
when you think of relationship, you got to think of positive attachment. And so even when you go to a therapist, positive attachment is important. Respond to that a little bit, Brother Patrick.
Yeah, I think that, relationships are everything. It is everything. And I think me having a healthy relationship, even in my home of origin, with my father, with my mother, my brothers and sisters, gives me the ability to, okay, I'm going to test this transparency. How am I going to do this? I'm just going to come forth with where I am. And of course, I believe that it's important to be authentic with everyone, but transparent with only a few that have that trustworthiness established. And I think through our relationship, time I was pastoring a church, we had connected over 10 years ago. We connected intellectually. We began to connect emotionally, definitely already connected spiritually. Through that dynamic, I think that's when your approach to corrective measures, your approach to, hey, let's be aware of this, let's be preemptive, let's be proactive, that established that trust. And I think foundationally in any interpersonal relationship, the value system behind interpersonal relationships, that value is called trustworthiness. The value of personal leadership is trust. So we were able to move from the personal leadership of trust to the interpersonal relationship of trustworthiness. And I think that that's where, or vice versa. So that's how, for me, it was very helpful in the sense that for those who may not have a counselor, they might not have a therapist, they might not have somebody that's a lay pastoral counseling or that type of opportunity. How do we really help people define or describe a healthy, functioning interpersonal relationship if they're functioning from a perspective of perceived or real trauma from their childhood and home of origin? I remember why certain areas of my anger manifested into even some rage issues or just closing off myself because there are some things that had not been dealt with. And so little did I know those things that impacted me into manhood. Now, thankfully, I had the right resources around me, had love, had care and concern in my family, and also in being open to establishing relationships. But I think that one of the most powerful resources is in helping us maintain ultimately our relationship with God, but also we need each other. There must be interpersonal, interdependent connections that are based on trust.
Absolutely. The Bible says, and I'm preaching on it right now, it's not good to be alone.
Hmm.
And there is more healing in the body of Christ than we recognize. And
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons we're having the problem we're having right now. We can't get together, we can't hug, we can't sing together, we're missing something. And that's there. So let me get this one last one I think is very important. Of course,
Yes, sir.
trusting God can be one of the most powerful resources. And let me just, maybe another time we can talk about, you can't be all messed up with everybody else and have a wonderful trust relationship with God.
Wow.
It doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm.
That's how people, the church, talk about it. Well, you know, I hate all the saints, but me and God are so tight. No, it doesn't work that way. If you don't love God, the Bible, John says, you can't love the people who you see. How can you love God whom you cannot see? That God operates and is manifested in people. So it's in working to establish a healthy relationship with God the Father. This is another whole, but I'm going to mention this is another whole teaching here, where each person of the Godhead, you can have a relationship with them. God the Father, God, the mediation of God the Son, the power of God the Holy Spirit, that will help you with grief, with stress, with anxiety, with PTSD, and with PTSD. They can be healed through your relationship with God. Now, I'm not talking about some ethereal thing. He's just going to come down. There's work to be done, but the work is in the relationship. I wrote a book called The Ravages of Rejection. And in that book, I talk about the children of Israel, what happened to them when they came out of Israel, how damaged they were because of the rejection of being in slavery down in Egypt. But as they came out, they were messed up. They said, we see ourselves as grasshoppers in our own eyes. It wasn't how the enemy saw them, it's how they saw themselves. But the answer in the book is not psychological. The answer in the book is not self-help. The answer in this book is praise and worship. That as you praise and worship God, you are establishing a healthy relationship with God the Father that begins to cleanse you of those kinds of things.
Bishop, this conversation has been incredible. We've covered so much in this amount of time. I want to encourage those of you who want to get more information in terms of resources. Let's talk through a few books. First, I want to mention Bishop Johnson has 2 books. You can get those on Amazon.com. His book is called Grief, the Biblical Pathway to God. And I think that's critical because when I read through it, and it helps us understand the spiritual elements and dimensions of grief. Some of the models and methodologies we're seeing out there has an absence of divinity and spirituality in it. This puts Christ at the center, God at the core of our transformational process. And that's what I've absorbed from that book as well. So I want you to look at that, Grief, the Biblical Pathway to God by Bishop Johnson, and then The God Who Grieves, that other book as well. So you can get that on Amazon. And I think that would really help you in terms of get the conversation starting in your home, conversations with your children, conversations with your friends, because I think as we begin to take ownership of where we are, that will help us in terms of our community, and take a day off from the media intake, take a day off from being bombarded with images, take some time to let your mind, your eyes, your senses to breathe, let those things breathe so that you can be emotionally, get that oxygenated, you can, emotionally. So that's critical. Bishop, any last words you want to share before we close out?
No, I think this has been incredible. We've covered a lot of stuff. I'm glad that it's recorded. It's going to be out there. People can go get it. I think I just want to pray for people after you have your last words.
No last words, sir. Go ahead and close us out. Thank you.
Father, I want to pray for folks that are on right now, and even for folks who will be watching later on from the recorded broadcast and the live stream. I'm going to ask that you calm their hearts and minds right now, bring them into a place of reality and calmness and peace with you right now. Would you just move in, and you say in your word, peace I give to you, my peace I leave with you and give to you, not as the world gives, do I give to you. So thank you for your peace. I thank you for the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. We have everything we need in you. So allow your comfort, your fellowship, for you to walk with us right now. Calm anyone whose heart may be anxious. I'm going to pray against anxiety attacks, panic attacks, all of those kinds of things. Let this live stream begin to be a healing impact for your people everywhere. I thank you for what we've done today, and we place it in your hands in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Bishop. Thanks, everyone. Have a very good afternoon. Bye-bye.